Trying out a new camera angle today. Thought this one might be kind of fun. Might make you feel something, make you feel a bit weird.
Now I'm just f***ing with you, of course. Doi. Same old, back to the way that it should be. Much like Resident Evil might be, maybe going in that direction too. I want to talk a bit about Resident Evil today. The game franchise. I do that now. Maybe. So there's a new Resident Evil is a really hard word to say. There is a new Resident Evil game coming out next year in February. It's number 9, but it's more like number 30 or something. Like, there's been so many of these games. New game in the mainline series, 1 to 9. It's fairly simple numbers. It's called Requiem, apparently, because they like doing their fancy little things with the titles now, incorporating like the Roman numerals into the title of the installment since 7. But I guess they couldn't figure out a good way of doing that with 9, because it would be VIII. No, Roman numeral for 9 is IX, right? Yeah, so the Roman numeral for X is, it's XI. They couldn't really figure out a good way of doing that with 9, so they just sort of flipped a Q. They did a, okay, that's fine, but you've ruined your Roman numeral pattern now, so it would be hard to fit an X into a title. Anyway, Resident Evil 9. I have a few thoughts about it because I really do generally quite like Resident Evil games, but I think as a franchise as a whole, Resident Evil can be very up and down. I think I want to talk about like my hopes and my dreams and my concerns for it. So I think I should probably explain my relationship with the other games before I talk about what I'm hoping to see from this one and what I'm concerned I might see. Resident Evil 7 was actually my first Resident Evil game. Even though I was a fan of horror games before that point, Resident Evil was kind of on shaky foundations. Resident Evil 5 came out and had a lot of problems that were not exclusive to the gameplay, shall we say. Resident Evil 6 came out and I remember like being aware of it, having kind of missed out on some of the earlier games in the franchise. My image of Resident Evil was very much that of like, there's a really shitty film franchise that is based on the games that looks pretty terrible, and there's this game that's come out that feels like a weird like arcade game almost. Like, that was the vibe that I got from 6. It was like loads of quick time events, turret sections, co-op, weird stuff, it felt like a game that you would play at like the arcade, next to House of the Dead or something. Just didn't appeal to me and people didn't like it, so never bothered. Resident Evil 7 was a real turning point for the franchise. It basically reinvented it, took it back to its roots, said, we're going to get rid of all of the nonsense that we had been building in the franchise up until this point. We're going to basically hit the reset button. We're going to make the game about a spooky house, and it's going to be survival horror focused, single player. We're going to make it a first person game this time to emphasize the environmental storytelling that the game is going to focus on. And I just remember being really surprised by the trailer and thinking, that doesn't even look like a Resident Evil game from what I know of Resident Evil. It looks like something completely new, and it caught my attention, caught everyone else's attention. Played the demo, that was great. Everyone kind of just accepted that Resident Evil needed a bit of a refresh. It needed a bit of a restart. It kind of reached a zenith of the style that they were going for in the 2000s, and just needed to do something new, and I think everyone appreciated that. So after playing Resident Evil 7 and really liking it, I then went back and played a bunch of the other Resident Evil games. Resident Evil 2 Remake then came out and I played that. That is probably my favorite Resident Evil game. So if you want to have like a kind of a overall idea as to the types of games that I like, or the Resident Evil games that I like, the Resident Evil 2 Remake is probably still my favorite. I just replayed it. I went back and played Resident Evil 4, which I really enjoyed. I went back and I played Resident Evil Revelations and Revelations 2. Quite liked Revelations 2, actually. Played Resident Evil 5 with a friend, played a bit of Resident Evil 6 with a friend. Never finished those ones, didn't really like those. Resident Evil 3 remake, bit disappointing. Resident Evil 4 remake, pretty good, pretty solid, but doesn't quite hold up to the original, isn't quite as out there and gregarious as the original, and as creative or inventive. It's just kind of like, here's Resident Evil 4, but a bit more boring now.
I've been expecting you, my brethren.
No thanks, bro.
Anyway, bottom line is, I like Resident Evil, I like a lot of them. I tend to prefer the more straightforward survival horror Resident Evil games. When they go full action, it kind of loses me, and the core gameplay loop that's not really what I'm looking for. I like all of the inventory management and the puzzles and the kind of Metroidvania-esque backtracking around one singular location and really having to conserve your ammunition and your supplies. I just like the Resident Evil games that are slower paced and that you have to think more about your decision making rather than just run and gun and, you know, shoot hordes of zombies. As fun as that can be, you know, I do like Resident Evil 4 quite a lot. It's just not my preferred version of Resident Evil. So that brings me to Resident Evil 8, or Resident Evil Village, which was the sequel to Resident Evil 7. So obviously I was very excited for it. I really liked the look of it going into it. I really liked the visuals. I really liked the look of all of the kind of crazy characters and the locations. Ultimately, I was really disappointed in Village because it kind of abandoned what they did so well in 7, and it seemed like they were kind of backtracking a bit, you know, after resetting everything with 7 and putting a focus on survival horror. They then immediately went back to the more action-oriented, set-piece driven style of 4, 5, and 6. On top of that, they also kind of admitted outright that they made Resident Evil Village less scary due to bits of feedback that they had gotten about 7 being too scary, which I don't know who was saying that or who wanted that. They made the game less scary, they made it far easier, they made it far more about the wacky, zany set pieces, and ultimately just made the game a hell of a lot boring. That's English, good job me. Ultimately they just made the game so much more boring and less engaging. Which leads me to Resident Evil 9, finally, I suppose. There's a lot of good signs about this one. They are seemingly done with the Ethan storyline, so Resident Evil 7 and 8 kind of being forgotten about now, or, you know, they're not continuing with Rose, Ethan's daughter, and all that stuff. I was kind of almost expecting 9 to follow like an adult Rose, but I suppose that's not the case, and I am not unhappy with that decision. They're also clearly advertising this game as a survival horror game. The tagline that they're using is addictive horror. That's what they're trying to achieve with this one. From all of the trailers and all the footage, it seems very much like we're going back to basics, even more so than 7. You know, they're really conjuring up images from the earlier games, seemingly going back to Raccoon City. Seems like there's going to be some more like traditional zombies in this one. 7 and 8 have kind of done their own thing with the tar monsters and werewolves. I'm super happy about this. However, I've been burned before, so I'm just conscious of the fact that we've not seen a load of gameplay. They are pushing and advertising the more stripped back horror focus. The new protagonist is also going back to just being like kind of an every woman kind of thing. They made a point of saying that Grace, the new protagonist for this one, is gonna be quite scared and afraid, and she's gonna react to things in a way that, you know, like a regular person would. They mentioned wanting to make Leon the main character for this one, and then saying, well, that wouldn't really work because Leon would not be afraid of anything.
I let our miserable insects out for some exercise down in the sewer.
Thanks. That should keep me company, 'cause boredom kills me.
We want the player to feel fear, so we want the main character, to also feel fear so that the player doesn't feel too, you know, comfortable and at ease, which is a good idea, and it worked for 7, and hopefully will work for this one. My concern is just that the game could very easily devolve into the typical Resident Evil action stuff. Another concern that I have is it's the 30th anniversary of Resident Evil next year. They've been very conscious of the fact that this is the game that will mark the 30th anniversary of Resident Evil. We're obviously kind of going back to Raccoon City. There's going to be elements of that, maybe even returning to some of the same locations. My concern is that what I think Resident Evil 7 and 8 to an extent did well was that it separated itself from the continuity, and it mostly went out and did its own thing with its own characters and own story. And my concern is that 9 might seize the opportunity to just go back into the Resident Evil comfort zone, which is the previous characters and the previous locations and the previous kind of story. I wouldn't be opposed to necessarily seeing some of the older characters back. In fact, I'm sure that inevitably there will be a few familiar faces that will pop up, especially if it is an anniversary game. You're going to want to give some fan service back, and that's fine. There are plenty of Resident Evil characters that I really love. I really hope we see Claire in the game. If anyone's going to come back that I would be interested in, that would be cool. Nice to see Leon, maybe. You know, we've not seen him for quite a while, so that would be nice. Don't need to see any more of Chris. Chris has overstayed his welcome, quite frankly.
Ethan, no.
There were rumours that maybe the game was going to have like a dual protagonist thing, which wouldn't be much of a surprise because Resident Evil has historically had multiple protagonists that you can play as throughout the games, like goes way back to the original Resident Evil. What I'm hoping is that they really do stick to that survival horror element and they don't have, say, maybe... I'm worried that you might get a section like in Resident Evil Village where you play as Chris and it just becomes like Call of Duty, but in the Resident Evil games. And they always do that and expect you to go, wow, this is so cool, I'm shooting all of the zombies. And I don't know, like, does that work on other people? Because it doesn't work on me. It reminds me very much of like the turret sections from 5 and 6. It's like, there's nothing actually fun going on here gameplay wise. You're just expecting me to just sit back and kind of ogle at the spectacle of, wow, I'm shooting loads of bullets at zombies and this is fun. To me, it's not what the franchise is about and it's not what I enjoy from it. So although I'm going into this game hopeful, I'm hoping that it will be a more streamlined survival horror experience. That's what they have been advertising it as. I am also aware that it could very easily devolve into the typical schlocky action stuff that seems to be Resident Evil's comfort zone. It seems like it always reverts back to just big, stupid action set pieces that kind of mean nothing and are ultimately unsatisfying from a gameplay perspective and a narrative perspective as well. Cautiously optimistic, shall we say. I'll play it, I'm looking forward to it, you know, it's only coming out in a few months, which is great. I love it when they announce games and it's like coming out in, 7 months, great, awesome. Please, can we do that more? Please, I just announce a game and release a fucking game. Like, don't have me waiting literal years. So thank you, Capcom, that's very kind of you. Yeah, looking forward to it. I will probably maybe report on the game later on if we do get a demo that we can play and I can give my opinions on it. If we get any new trailers that seem to suggest elements of the game, I might come back and, kind of talk about it more, and maybe when it comes out I'll do like a full review of it or something, because I am excited for it, I am looking forward to it. I like Resident Evil overall, but it's got to deliver on that survival horror stuff, and if it does, if it goes back to basics, then I will be very happy, be very pleased. Outside of the last 15 minutes of the game, if I get offered a massive fuck off machine gun, I'm gonna be a little bit disappointed, basically. That's the vibe that I want. Maybe I'm completely unique in that, but yeah, we'll see.
Why don't you do us all a favor and leave before the audience gets pissed off?